here with Coach. And like I said, for the transcript purposes, please use the microphone so they can hear you. Kevin?
Okay. Billy, first of all, obviously last year, what made your team so consistent, obviously, was the defensive end of the floor, and you're losing four guys that were really kind of committed to it, kind of the will and skill for it. What are your hopes or expectations for this team kind of growing and developing as a defensive team?
Well, I think obviously what those guys did last year was pretty remarkable and pretty special. But I think you'd have to make the point that that group had to go through a lot of pain and suffering, so to speak. Losing 3 games in the Elite Eight with obviously an opportunity to get to a Final Four. Losing in some conference tournament championship games. Winning the league 3 of the last 4 years was a positive, but they went through some very painful situations. That's always difficult when you sit into a locker room when you get eliminated at any point during the NCAA tournament. But certainly 3 years in a row kind of getting to that point and maybe not being able to get past that. And I do think that when you get into those situations, a lot of times the experiences that you go through, some of that pain and suffering, really enables you to persevere, be more resilient. I think you develop qualities as a team through those failures that allow you to kind of progress and move on. And I think for those guys, they understood, being seniors, what went into a league schedule, what went into a non-conference schedule, what it was like to play in the postseason. They had some experiences there. I think the different part right now for us is we're losing 4 players that were very, very consistent, that were very experienced and knew what college basketball was all about. I think this year's team, they haven't faced any adversity like this past group had. We really have not. One of the things I think what happens with adversity is last year's team worked really, really hard, and the results that we got were extraordinary. But that team also in the past had worked very, very hard and didn't get the same results. So that's going to be, I think, a challenge that these guys have not been tested in, the fact that they can come out there, work really, really hard and may not get the results through a lack of experience or being prepared to handle that. So I look at a couple things right now for this team going forward that a couple things are concerns for me. There was no level of consistency at all from our returning players outside of Michael Frazier. There was moments that they played exceptionally well. There was moments that they really did a great job. But there was a discipline issue on the court in terms of being reliable guys game in and game out. That is going to be a challenge. And I thought that was the one thing about last year's group, especially older guys, is they developed a real great level of discipline on the defensive end of the court. They were really, really good at what they were doing, and that's got to be something we try to develop.
You touched on Michael Frazier. He's received a lot of preseason attention based on the lone returning starter coming back, 37-point game. How would you describe his offseason, and how much maybe do you think he has to take on a little bit more of a leadership role this year?
Concerned about that. I'd say the last couple years for Michael, he's played on some teams where he hasn't had to do any of those things you've mentioned. He's been a guy that's, probably had been in the background a lot and was able to do the things he does well, and that's shoot the basketball. And this year it's going to be different for him. I think he has worked really hard in understanding that. I think he understands what he's up against this year. It's a little bit different when you take the floor and you're the 4th or 5th guy in a scouting report and then maybe possibly move into the number 1 guy in a scouting report. There's a totally different set of circumstances that he has to deal with that he's never dealt with before. I think as a coach, I have to try to help him through that, to get through some of that stuff. But a lot of those accolades or things that people are talking about before the season has started don't really make a difference because he has not done it yet in this kind of role he's going to be in this year. And it doesn't all fall on his shoulders. We have other guys that need to step up as well. But Michael's a really great worker. I think he's very driven. He's very committed. But I think he's also excited about the challenge this year because this is going to stretch him in some ways that he has not been stretched the last 2 years.
Billy, last year you guys started a couple of suspensions, couple of injuries. Obviously, Devon is out for the season from July. But any updates on any injuries or suspensions going into this season?
Well, a couple of things. One, Chris Walker is going to be suspended the first 3 games for violation of team rules, so he's not going to play. Brandon Francis right now is admitted into school, and the NCAA has given him the opportunity to to be here, but he's got to prove himself academically. He is not available to play this year. He will not be allowed to play. There's things that he has to do academically while he's here to get himself eligible to play. If he progresses in this first semester like we hope to, he'll be allowed to come back to practice for the second semester. Eli Carter is, I think, moving in a much, much more positive direction than he did a year ago. He should be much, much better in terms of his availability this year. He is recovering from a little bit of an ankle injury. He's got a bone bruise right now that shouldn't slow him too much, but he could be limited the first couple days of practice. As you mentioned, Devon Walker with his injuries out, and then Alex Murphy, due to him transferring, may miss the first 8 or 10 games, but once the first semester is over with, he'll be back. So that's kind of where we're at right now, with our team. And, we've got Dylan Graham also has finally been cleared for contact. He's done some stuff last week contact-wise. But again, he's been out for a long period of time. So, where he's at right now as a player, I'm not really sure. I did see him do some individual things, against other players, but nothing team-wise yet. I do think anytime you miss a whole year, that's something that's probably has, hurt his growth and development. Where he will be once we start practice, I'll probably have a better feel after the first couple weeks of practice to see how he responds to, having hip surgery in both of his hips.
You mentioned losing a year really hurts growth and development. Can you talk more about Devon losing this whole year? And he really proved to be an effective swingman towards the end of last year. What does that loss mean to your team?
I think it's a big loss for us just because he's a veteran guy. He's a junior. But I do think this with when the injury took place, we're hopeful to have him back in January or February. Now, he won't play, but he'll be able to get back on the court and contribute in practice. I still think that he can salvage this year as it relates to his development. It's not going to be a situation where he's going to be actually, no activity. Right now he's rehabilitating his knee, but there'll become a point in time during this season that we'll be able to get him back on the practice court and be able to work with him. So I still think that he can make some strides and he can grow from this injury based on when it took place and based on when we hope to have him back in practice.
Billy, can you just talk about, you've had some great point guards through the years and what Casey has to do. I think you're a believer that you're only as good as your point guard and what he's done over the offseason to improve his shooting.
Yeah, I think one of the things with Casey is he's really obviously explosive in the open court. He's great when he gets in the lane. I think the biggest thing for him, one, is he needs to be more of a physical point guard, especially on the defensive end of the floor than he's been. I thought last year he had some really, really incredible bright spots, and then I thought he had some spots where he really learned a great deal. And, we couldn't rely on him maybe as much. We had that luxury, which was pretty good because as consistent as Scotty was, we could play both of them together. And then if Casey wasn't playing well, we could always kind of fall back to Scotty. This is going to be a different role for him this year in terms of being a primary guy that's got to really make a good jump for us from a year ago. But I think the biggest challenge that I see in Casey is, what kind of jump can he make defensively? That's going to be really, really important. He's a great kid. I love coaching him. He's coachable. He wants the truth. I think a lot of players sometimes don't like hearing the truth. I think he does. I think that's what gives him a chance to grow and get better. I do think his energy level and his emotional level needs to be better than it's been in the past, but there's a lot of things I think he's got to get better at that he has control over. I'm not really that worried, Pat, about his shooting. I think he needs to take good shots. I do think he's gotten better as a shooter, but he needs to really play to his strengths, and we need to try to help him do that. I do think from an offensive standpoint, because our team is a little bit different, we're going to have to do some different things offensively for him and for some other guys than maybe we had to do the last couple years.
Coach, what's it like to be kind of the standard bearer for recent success among football and basketball here?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
4 Elite Eights in a row, Final Four. You have better success than the football team has in more recent years. What's that like?
Yeah, I don't really look at it that way. I think the one thing that Jeremy has done here is we're all in this together. It's not about that. I've got an enormous amount of respect for Will, and obviously for him, I look at things a little bit differently. Certainly, he took over a situation that was really, really challenging, in my opinion. I thought he imposed his style of play on his team. I thought, the year before, I saw an unbelievable change inside of his team from a physical standpoint from year 1 to year 2. And I also think that the way they had to handle all the injuries last year was something to me that was just totally insurmountable to ever overcome. I mean, it was you can't lose the level of players, and I respected the way Will handled it because he never used it as an excuse. But the truth is, you can't lose that many good players and be good. You just can't. And then I think I look at their team even this year. Just there was times last year when I watched it, you saw them kind of. I think Will talked about this, woes me, all that stuff. Their team is not that way at all. And I think the guy has done an incredible job of changing the culture in terms of his team from one year to the next in a very positive way. So for me, we're all in this together. I had him actually come over and talk to our team in the summer because I wanted him to get across to our guys like they did, coming off an incredible season and going to a BCS bowl game and then the next year turning around and being, decimated with injuries. Whether it's graduation or whether it's injuries, we lost a lot of guys. And as he said, you just don't plug guys in and guys just step up. So I think there's a lot that he was able to provide for our team and helping our team grow in terms of his experiences as a coach too. So I never look at it as, I always look at it as Florida, everybody doing well. But just me from a coaching standpoint, where his team was at emotionally now and where they're at emotionally now, I mean, it's really, really impressive. And again, I look at things a little bit differently. I know a lot of times people look at just results, but I think if you look at the transformation inside their team, to me, watching them play this year compared to last year, to me, it's night and day. I know nothing about football. I don't know about strategies and schemes. I'm just telling you how they play in the game.
And as you head into year 18, how do you continue to
19 now. I mean, come on, make me younger now.
How do you continue to kind of adjust to the way the game's change? How do you try to stay in front of the way the game changes?
Well, I think the one thing I always try to do is at the end of every year is you always try to self-reflect in areas we could get better, things we did well, and then I'm always looking to I always like learning and trying to get better, meet, talk to different people, evaluate. I enjoy that part of it there. And maybe there's something that we can bring to the table that was a little bit different than the year before. But I would say it's the one thing for me that excites me in terms of starting a new year is the kind of the preparation leading up to it in terms of how I want our team to play, what identity we want to play to, and then trying to figure out ways for us to become a cohesive team and a team that plays for one another and a team that's unselfish and has good chemistry.
Along those same lines, college basketball changes so much every year. You have the one and done, but I know you're never satisfied, but how satisfying has it been to keep the level of success you've had since winning the national titles and keep this program on top, even though you've had losses every year?
Well, the thing that was most rewarding last year, as I sat in this room a year ago today, getting ready to start, I think I probably mentioned you, and I know sometimes people think I come in here as like doom and gloom, when the year starts, but we were really a dysfunctional team last year. We had some suspensions, we had some injuries. I didn't think we were a real connected, cohesive group. To see those guys come together as a team like they did, to see them in the non-conference deal with some of the adversity we had to deal with, where we had, Scotty out and Casey Hill out, and we played against Middle Tennessee State with no point guard. We came down the stretch at UConn in early December, and Scotty fouled out of the game with 2 minutes to go, and Casey Hill was still hurt with a high ankle sprain. Will you get managing a very difficult knee situation all the way through? We became a team, and I would say that when we started a year ago, we were not a team. And that was the most rewarding part for me, is how those guys evolved and became a team. And I think we were a true essence of a team. To me, we weren't the most talented team in the country last year. We went through a year, and none of those guys even got drafted. But you talk about them investing in one another and them sacrificing for one another, them caring for one another, and wanting to play the game for the right reasons for one another. That was really rewarding to me, because I could not sit here a year ago and say that I was really 100% sure that could happen. We had our player of the year, And Scotty, just obviously some of the choices and decisions he's made and where he was at a year ago today and then where he ended up was one of the great things for me as a coach I had a chance to experience. To see the growth of Patrick over 3 or 4 years was really incredible. Same thing with Prather. The year Prather had, he was a guy that was hobbled by a lot of injuries, and then obviously this senior year he had an unbelievable year and really stepped up and played well. Those things, to me, really, really bring a lot of value. Obviously, I wished against UConn. I think at the end of the year, UConn was clearly the best team, not taking anything away from them. I didn't think that we played one of our better games in that game, and they probably had a lot to do with that. But that was the only disappointing part, is at the end of the year, I wish we would have played a little bit better. And it still may not have been good enough to win, but I know we didn't play one of our better games.
Yeah, Billy. How you doing?
I'm great. You golf today?
Not today,
Okay.
but soon.
All right.
So Chris, will the exhibition game be included among the 3?
I would imagine one of them would be, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And notwithstanding the suspension, how has he developed physically and off the court, and what's his weight up to, and how critical of a role do you expect for him to play this year?
I think to all those questions, I don't know. I don't. He has worked very, very hard in the weight room. I think the biggest thing, his biggest challenge this year, in my opinion, is going to be his ability to manage expectations. And the one thing I admired about him a year ago was, here comes a highly profiled kid coming into our season in the middle of January, and I had so many people tell me, geez, your team is playing so well, you're going to inject this guy, what's his ego going to be like? He was an unbelievable teammate last year in terms of understanding the fact that he had missed so much of the summer, non-conference, and when he came there, he never, ever once complained about playing time. He wanted to do whatever he could do to help. You hear all these expectations, and people look at the fact that he's gotten physically strong and everything else. He has such a long way to go in terms of being reliable, accountable, and disciplined. Those would be the 3 things that I would say I don't have a real good grasp on right now, but we're going to find out. And, him being reliable on the court to be able to do his job, him being responsible as it relates to his work ethic each and every day and understanding his role, those are going to be some things where I think he's going to have to battle some of those expectations part of it, because certainly he has been billed and hyped up. I've never seen a guy have more hype coming into the middle of our year. And I kept telling you guys, listen, he's not going to be ready to do all that. And I think I was accurate. I don't know what kind of impact he's going to make, and I think that he's going to have to really be able to handle that, where he's got maybe his own personal expectation of where he thinks he should be, and if he's not at that level, how is he going to handle that? And I think that's one of the most difficult things to deal with as a coach, is when you have players with individual expectations that don't get met with how they're performing. And he's got to have a realistic expectation. He's got a long way to go. I think he's probably up to about between 222, 225, somewhere in there. The best part of his game is, I think, offensively right now. He's got a long way to go. I don't know if he necessarily has an offensive go-to game, so to speak. He's a terrific athlete. He's got a really good motor. He tries to go rebound and chase balls on the glass. He's a good shot blocker. I think he's very quick off the dribble. He actually can drive the ball some from the perimeter. But he's not a great jump shooter. He's not a great back-to-the-basket player. He's not a guy you can just throw the ball to and he can go get you. But I do think there's a lot of value he can bring into our team.
Coach, talking about those, how the team was really defensively really well set up last year, can you see expectations maybe from Walker and as well as John Horford, him transferring here, adding that to around the rim and being able to set up a defensive presence, especially with their height?
Yeah, our Patrick clearly, when we went into every game, was always going to be the strongest, most physical guy on the court. We had a huge advantage with that. And then I still think to this day, maybe the greatest pick-and-roll defender I've ever coached here was Patrick. He was just incredible there. I don't think Chris is that kind of player. He doesn't have that kind of physicality at the basket. Either does John Horford. With Murphy being out, mid-semester, Dorian being available. We don't have the size, strength, or physicality at the basket that we had a year ago. We just don't. I wouldn't say we're a soft team at the basket, but we don't have the girth and the physicality of Patrick. Even Will You Get was a physical presence in around the basket. Prather was a physical player. We don't have those kind of players. We're a little bit of a different team, as it relates to that. And we're going to have to do a good job collectively defending, the low post and helping. But that's certainly going into this year a concern of mine is just what kind of presence we're going to have at the basket.
And what type of things from maybe freshman Devin Robinson we could probably expect from him concerning, the starting rotations, or maybe just him getting minutes and getting experience and be able to input his abilities on the court?
He and Chris Chioza both have done a good job here so far. I don't think you ever really get a full taste of what a freshman's going to be his freshman year. I usually get a pretty good idea after the first couple weeks of practice, when they start to respond to adversity and fatigue and those kind of things. But I think Devin's got really good potential. I think he's going to be a really, really good player. He gives us perimeter shooting. Even though he's 6'9", he doesn't give us great physicality. He's wiry. He's athletic. He's very gifted offensively. I think Chris Chioza right now, very similar to the way Casey Hill was, needs to be more of a physical defender. But he's got a good feel of how to play. He's good with the ball, and he can see, and he can really pass. I would say the one thing that's better with this year's team than a year ago is I think that we maybe have a little bit more shooting than we had the previous year. And I think we actually may be a little bit passing the basketball than we were a year ago. But we don't have that defensive nastiness that we had a year ago, and we're going to have to work hard to develop it. And what kind of identity we can create on the defensive end of the floor remains to be seen. But that's certainly something we're going to have to really, really work hard at, because when you look at, outside of Frazier, when you look at Dorian Finney-Smith, when you look at Casey Hill, when you look at Chris Walker, in terms of their reliability, accountability, they were really, really hard at times to rely on defensively, and they need to make a big jump there from where they were a year ago.
How do you envision Dorian Finney-Smith's role with the team this year? And do you see him more as a starter or kind of a spark plug off the bench like he was last year?
I'm really, really pleased with the growth that he's made and the jump that he made. I felt like last year he was really, really inconsistent. He had some unbelievable games like at Arkansas where he really stepped up and actually single-handedly helped us win the game. He played exceptionally well at home against Florida State, played really good against Kansas, but then there was some games where he just kind of disappeared. I think he's starting to step up and emerge as a guy that's going to be a little bit more reliable than he was a year ago. I thought one of the things that he struggled with is he had a hard time finishing and making plays around the basket. That's an area of his game where he's gotten a little bit better and he's got more confidence playing around the basket.
Hey, Billy, could you touch on John Egbunu joining the program, and did he petition for immediate eligibility?
We are in the process of doing that. There's some things that are going on there. I'm probably not allowed to get in great detail about any of those things, but John is going to be a very, very good player. That's a guy I think, whether or not he plays this year or not, if it's next year, he's going to, he's 6'10", 250, 260. He's what you're talking about, a big, strong, physical presence at the basket. He's a great kid. I think he'll help us, in practice if he's not able to play. But we are appealing. Where that leads, I don't know yet. I would say that right now, if I had to guess, it's probably leaning more towards him having to sit out this year, but we're going to kind of exhaust all of our avenues and see where it leads us. But I think he's going to be a very, very good player.
And secondly, how concerned are you depth-wise, especially early in the year? First few games, about half your scholarship roster won't be available.
Well, I'm concerned from this standpoint, obviously with Chris being out and Alex Murphy being out, Brandon Francis being out. The biggest question now comes in our backcourt is, what kind of, how reliable will Dylan Graham and Eli Carter be coming off their injuries? They're much, much better than they were. But can they hold up in practice every day? Is this a situation where they practice a couple times or have to take a day off? Where are they going to be at physically? That gives us a little bit of depth. If they're not great physically, how do we now maybe have to play Chris Chioser and Casey Hill together? Now we got two really small guards back there, which is probably not ideal. If not, do we now slot a guy like Devin Robinson into the backcourt because he's got enough guard skills that he can do that? But I always get a little bit leery when you have a freshman and you're trying to get that guy to learn multiple positions. That becomes really challenging. So we're going to have to rely on a guy like maybe Dodo moving around to some different spots because he's been in the system. He knows a little bit more. I think John Horford being a senior and, obviously being a part of a lot of success at Michigan can play a couple different spots. So, we're going to have some flexibility in our roster as we get everybody back. But at the beginning of the year, as you mentioned, having a lot of guys out, maybe being limited, we're going to have to probably do some different things lineup-wise to, offset maybe some of those depth issues.
Billy, Zach Hodgkins obviously is an inspirational story, gained a lot of national attention. How is he kind of adapting so far, and what do you want his approach to kind of be in practice and during the course of the season?
Well, I think the biggest thing for Zach is just, I think he just wants to be like everybody else on our team. With him being on our team, I think he just wants to contribute and help any way he can. I think it was a dream for him to come here to Florida. He's a great kid, certainly inspirational, I think, to a lot of different people. But, he's got a great platform, in my opinion, to really inspire a lot of different people. The one thing I admire about him is he loves the game of basketball. He loves competing. He loves being out there. And it's good to have him part of our team. But I think at the same point, he would tell you he just wants to be treated like anybody else.
And personally, you're kind of closing in on a milestone, 500 wins. You're 14 wins away. What does that just kind of mean to you and everything that you've managed to accomplish for 19 seasons?
Getting old, getting older. I always say this. I think that anytime you hit milestones like that, I think it's always a byproduct of the players and the assistant coaches. I don't think as a coach you're only as good as the people around you, and that goes to players and coaches. So, to me, that just says that starting 19 years here, is I've been fortunate to have a lot of good players and a lot of good assistants around me.
Two at Marshall too.
Two at Marshall would take that. Had a pretty good staff there that came here with us to Florida. So and pretty good players with Jason Williams and John Brannon and some of those other guys. They did a pretty good job as well.
Hey, Billy, you mentioned a lack of consistency. Is there almost a sense of entitlement because of what happened last year? And if so, could that be motivation or hurt?
I don't think it's entitlement. I think it's a lack of not living in the real world. And what I mean by that is I've been doing this for, coaching for 25, 26 years. I've never been a part of a team that's won 30 straight games. I mean, we won 125 days without losing. And when you talk about a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith, when you talk about Casey Hill, when you talk about Chris Walker, when you talk about guys that are young being involved in that, that's all they really know. So there's an expectation part for them that I think that they're hopeful they can get back to that point, but they haven't really been they haven't had to face a lot of adversity. Maybe personally at different points in time during the season they did, but we never faced a lot of team adversity right now. And that's going to be, and we've talked a lot about this in the offseason, not to say that we're going into the year hoping to lose or hoping to face adversity, but how you respond to those things is going to be really, really important. There's no doubt in my mind, Scotty Wilbekin had the year he had because he responded the right way to adversity. There's no question about that. Same thing with Patrick Young. Same thing with Prather. Will you get? Those guys all responded really, really well to that. I don't know how these guys are going to respond. Chris Walker played 4 minutes a game, and all of a sudden everybody's expecting him to be like this savior in the front court. And I can't tell you that he's really ready to handle that or capable of handling that or is even, in a position to handle that. Casey Hill's going from a guy that, played backup role to Scotty Wilbekin. Now he's stepping there. So they have expectations. They want to do well. But I always think there's a really, really healthy, there's got to be a healthy complement of having a level of humility and understanding what competition is and also being confident in competition. And when those two things don't match up, if you're overconfident, okay, if you don't have enough confidence, there's a healthy balance there. And I think last year there was no balance for those guys. And I'm glad there wasn't. It means we had a good year. But how are they going to handle that going forward is going to be critical, and we need a healthy a dose of that. And I feel like my challenge to coach this year is there's going to be things that are going to have to take place that are going to be really, really painful, that are going to enable our team to grow, okay? But then there's also things that you know are detrimental as a coach you got to try to head off because we're just going down the wrong road. And there's got to be a balance between them going through some struggles and through some adversity because it's just part of their normal growing and maturing process. And sometimes I may not be able to help. They're going to have to figure some of this out. And there's other times I think I can help, but that's going to be, I think, a challenge for myself and our staff.
Horford and I guess Murphy as well, you know, as soon as they take the court, they're going to be compared to their older brothers. How are they similar, and then how are they different as well?
Well, the ironic part is that they're not even similar to each other at all, other than they have the same last name. You know, they're totally different. Alex is a totally different player than Eric. He's more of a small forward. He's better with the ball. You know, he almost can play like a guard, whereas, you know, Eric was, you know, obviously a stretch four-man. We played him at the center spot some. Al Horford was a real physical, athletic guy at the basket. John's not really like that. That's not his game. John's a really good perimeter shooter and can do a lot of different things. But I think that both those guys' games are a little bit different than each other.
You mentioned worrying about the team defensively, but losing the four seniors and all that offense that you had, are you worried about how you're going to score the basketball this year?
Well, I mean, I think we're going to always score like we always have here, and we've had years where we've lost guys, you know, to graduation or early departure. I think the biggest thing for us is going to be through ball movement, player movement, extra passing, and those kind of things. I've always been a big believer in trying to come down the floor and get quality of shots, quality possessions, and whoever shoots it, is it a shot that's good for them that they can make? So I've never gone into the year like, okay, this has got to be our guy. He's got to score. This guy's got to score. We got to utilize each other and put ourselves in position to score. I do think one of the things that helps you offensively is when you have a team that can really pass the basketball. I think we'll be an improved team passing the basketball. We're not going to have the offensive presence at the basket like we had the last couple of years with Patrick. So we're going to have to do some different things, but we're going to have to be a team that relies on each other to score.
If teams are going to focus more on Michael Frazier this year, what does he need to do to maybe be able to not just be that spot-up shooter anymore?
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have to do some different things, and that's a great point. I think the first thing, it starts with his conditioning. Is he going to be conditioned enough to work the floor enough to get himself free? If he does get, you know, a lot of help in coverages coming off screens, is he going to have the wherewithal to find the open man and make the game easy for himself? It could be a situation for Mike where, you know what, in some games he may not score. But it could be a game where he gets 5 or 6 or 7 assists and really impacts winning. He's got to be prepared to handle that. It's making our team better. If someone wants to take him out, there's got to be someone else that's open, and that's part of his growth. That's something he's never had to experience before and something he's going to be challenged with. But I think he understands that. It's just he hasn't gone through it yet, so we'll see how he responds to that.
All right, thanks, guys. We'll have players on the floor in about 10 minutes or so, and this room will be open if you guys want to come back here and work.
Thank you.